I grew up in a small town in New England where my father was the local pastor. Our house was just a short walk from the church, and in many ways my life began and ended there. I remember the smell of old wooden pews, the sound of hymns echoing in the hall, my father's voice rising and falling from the pulpit. Sunday wasn't just a day of worship, it was the center of our entire week, and the church was the center of our entire world. From my earliest memories, my father had a vision for me. He used to put his hand gently on my shoulder and say, "One day, you'll serve God in a special way." He imagined me as a missionary, someone who would travel the world and bring people to Christ. I grew up hearing about sacrifice, devotion, faith, and I truly believed that my path was already written. I would follow his footsteps, just in a different place. For more than 20 years of my life, I knew almost nothing about Islam. It wasn't just ignorance, it was absence. Islam did not exist in my conversations, in my church, in my books, in my education. When we spoke about religion, it was always Christianity at the center, and then a vague, distant category called other religions. Islam was buried somewhere in that fog, unmentioned, unexplained. The only images I ever saw of Muslims were on television, usually during news broadcasts about war, terrorism, or political unrest. They were nameless faces behind smoke and flames. No one sat me down to say, "This is what Muslims actually believe." No one opened a book and said, "This is what the Qur'an really says." It was as if an entire civilization had been reduced to a single word: problem. When I enrolled at Temple University in Philadelphia to study media, I felt like I was finally stepping out into the real world. I wanted to understand how stories are shaped, how information is controlled, how narratives are built. Alongside my media studies, I took courses in political science and Middle Eastern strategies. I wanted to understand global politics, especially the parts that seemed to be constantly on the news. In those classrooms, something subtle but disturbing began to unfold. We would discuss the Middle East, its governments, revolutions, uprisings, alliances, but Islam itself was treated like a shadow at the edge of the conversation. Professors would speak at length about oil, military strategies, colonial histories, but when it came to Islam, their words became short, sharp, and shallow. Sometimes a professor would say, "Of course, religion plays a role," and then quickly move on. At other times, Islam would be mentioned only in negative contexts: extremism, oppression, violence. There was no effort to explain what Muslims actually believed, how they worshipped, or what their scripture taught. An entire faith followed by over 1 billion people was squeezed into a few dark, recycled phrases. I remember one lecture especially. The topic was the modern Middle East. For nearly an hour, the professor spoke about borders drawn by colonial powers, economic interests, and political coups. Then a student raised his hand and asked, "What about Islam? Doesn't it play a role in how people see themselves?" The professor paused, gave a brief, dismissive answer about religious fundamentalism, linked it to instability, then quickly returned to talking about oil pipelines. Sitting there, I felt something tighten inside me. It wasn't that I suddenly trusted Islam or liked it. At that point, I barely knew what it was. It was the silence that disturbed me, the careful avoidance, the way the subject seemed off limits except when used as a convenient explanation for violence. I found myself asking, why? Why is this topic treated like a problem to skip, not a reality to understand? Day after day, lecture after lecture, I noticed the same pattern: detailed analysis of politics, power, and profit. But when Islam appeared, it came as a shadow, a stereotype, or a threat, and a question started to grow in my mind. If this religion is so unimportant, why is it constantly in the background of every discussion? And if it is so dangerous, why are we never encouraged to actually study it seriously, directly, from its own sources? That question became a seed of doubt, not about Islam, but about the education I was receiving. I had come to university believing I would be taught to seek truth. Instead, I began to feel that I was being taught what to think, not how to think. I realized that I was being handed a narrative, not knowledge. One day after class, I walked straight to the library with a strange determination in my chest. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, But I knew I wanted to see Islam with my own eyes, not through the eyes of people who were clearly uncomfortable with it. I searched the catalog for books on Islam, on the Qur'an, on Islamic history. I gathered whatever I could find and sat down with a pile of books in front of me. I remember opening the first book with a kind of suspicion. Part of me expected to find something obviously harsh, irrational, or backwards, something that would confirm everything I had absorbed without question. But as I read, something very different unfolded. I met, for the first time, the concept of pure monotheism, Tawhid, not just believe in God, but worship God alone, without partners, without saints, without a son, without anything sharing his divinity. I read about a God who is one, absolute, unlike his creation, who does not become human and does not depend on anyone, while everyone depends on him. I read about prophets I already knew, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, peace be upon them all. But here, they were united in one chain, carrying the same essential message: worship God alone and follow his guidance. Islam did not erase them. It honored them, clarified their stories, and placed Muhammad, peace be upon him, as the final messenger in that line. When I read about Jesus in Islam, something inside me shifted. Islam described him as a noble, beloved prophet, born miraculously to Mary, performing miracles by God's permission, but not God, not the Son of God. Growing up, I had struggled quietly with the doctrine of the Trinity, the idea of worshiping Jesus instead of following him. I never dared to say it out loud, but in my heart, it never fully made sense. Islam spoke to that hidden struggle. It allowed me to love Jesus deeply, to honor him, to follow his teachings without worshiping him. Then I began to read about Islamic law, about the way Islam deals with everyday life. I found clear, firm rulings against things I saw destroying people around me: alcohol, drugs, gambling, adultery, exploitation. I thought about the college parties, the broken homes, the addictions, the casual relationships that left people feeling empty and used. In my own society, many of these things were not just allowed, but celebrated. Yet, I could see their damage everywhere. Islam didn't shrug and say, everyone is free to do what they want. It recognized the human tendency to harm ourselves in the name of pleasure, and wrapped that tendency in protection. It said no to certain desires, not because it was cruel, but because it was merciful. It called the human being to purity, self-control, responsibility, and dignity. The more I read, the more I realized that Islam was not a random collection of harsh rules or strange rituals. It was a complete, coherent way of life, built around a clear purpose: to worship Allah alone and to live in a way that protects the soul, the family, and society. It spoke to my mind as much as to my heart. I found myself thinking about Islam all the time. On the bus, I would stare out the window and silently repeat words I had read from the Qur'an. Late at night, I would lie awake, my heart beating faster as I imagined what it would mean to actually live this way, to fully submit to this God I was reading about. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a new world, one that both terrified and attracted me. During all of this, my father remained unaware of what was happening inside me. He still saw me as his daughter, maybe a bit more serious now, a bit more focused, but he had no idea that I was reading the very religion he had always regarded as false. When he finally realized that I was studying Islam, not casually but deeply, his reaction was fierce. He was not only a father, he was a pastor. For him, Islam was not just another religion. It was an enemy to the faith he had dedicated his life to. He tried everything: reasoning, emotional appeals, even anger. He reminded me of my upbringing, of my baptism, of the church community that had surrounded me. He warned me about deception, about losing my soul, about betraying Christ. I listened and my heart ached for him. I knew this was painful for him, but at the same time I could not unlearn what I had learned. I could not unsee the clarity, the simplicity, the power of La ilaha illallah. There is no God worthy of worship except Allah. I could not pretend that I still believed in what I no longer believed in. Inside me, a battle was reaching its conclusion. I was torn between the love of my father and the love of the truth I had discovered, between the faith I had inherited and the faith I had chosen. there came a day when I knew that remaining in this state of hesitation was itself a kind of rejection. I had to decide. Alone, between myself and my Creator, I uttered the words that would change my life. I bear witness that there is no God worthy of worship except Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his servant and his messenger. In that moment, without any dramatic scene, my heart crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I was no longer a Christian by identity or by habit. I was a Muslim. The consequences were painful. My father's disappointment was deep and raw. He saw my choice as a rejection of everything he stood for. Our conversations became heavy, our home filled with tension. But even in my sadness, there was a light that did not go out. I knew that the one who created me had guided me, and I trusted that he would carry me through whatever came next. After some time, another longing grew inside me, the desire to live where Islam was not an exception, but the norm. I wanted to hear the adhan with my own ears, to see mosques not as distant images, but as part of my daily path. I wanted to study Arabic so I could read the Qur'an as it was revealed, not only in translation. That longing pulled me toward Egypt. Leaving America was another leap. I left behind the streets I knew, the language that had shaped me, the culture that had raised me. Cairo met me with chaos, color, noise, and beauty. It overwhelmed me and embraced me at the same time. 5 times a day, the call to prayer rose above the city, and every time I heard it, my heart answered, "Yes, I am one of them now. I am one of those called to stand before Allah." I enrolled in Arabic classes and began the slow, humbling journey of learning a new language. Each letter, each word was a key to something greater. Verses of the Qur'an that I had only known in English suddenly opened in a new way when I heard them in their original form. The rhythm, the depth, the precision, everything felt different. It was as if I had been reading the reflection of the moon in water, and now I was finally seeing the moon itself. During my time in Egypt, I met a young Muslim man. He was serious about his faith, regular in his prayers, respectful in his behavior. What impressed me most was not how much he talked about Islam, but how quietly he lived it. His humility, his sense of responsibility, his concern for pleasing Allah in small and big matters. It all resonated with what I had come to love in this religion. When he asked me to marry him, I didn't answer lightly. I thought about the life I had left behind, the path Allah had brought me through, the future I wanted. I wanted a home where we could build our life around the prayer mat, not around the television. A home where our children would grow up saying Allah as naturally as they said Mama and Baba. I wanted a partner who would remind me of Allah when I forgot and hold my hand on the path to Jannah. I accepted his proposal, and by the mercy of Allah, we married. About 2 years later, Allah blessed us with a son. We named him Taha, a name from the Qur'an. The first time I held him, I felt the weight of a journey that had carried me from a pastor's house in New England to a Muslim home in Egypt. I looked at his tiny face and whispered a dua in my heart. O Allah, let him grow as a righteous servant. Protect him from misguidance. Make him a light in this world and in the next. Now, when I look back, I see how every attempt to hide Islam from me became a reason for me to search for it. Every negative portrayal, every silence in the classroom, every biased lecture pushed me closer to the question, what are they so afraid for me to see? And when I finally looked for myself, I did see, not a religion of darkness, but a path of light. I was once prepared to be a missionary for a faith I inherited. Today I am a Muslim by choice. I once stood in churches singing words I never fully understood. Now I stand in prayer, placing my forehead on the ground, knowing exactly who I am worshiping and why. I once carried hidden doubts in my heart. Now I carry a certainty that has cost me, challenged me, and completed me. This is my story. The journey of a pastor's daughter who went searching for truth and found Islam, not in the voices that tried to define it for her, but in the words of Allah and the example of his final messenger. And every day as I walk this path, I make one simple dua, that Allah keeps my heart firm on this guidance, and that he allows my life, my marriage, and my child to be part of the story of his mercy.